Bitter Winter, 29th of January 2024, A New Great Game, the Dalai Lama, the Calm Indian, and the Aggressive China. China has illegally invaded Tibet and forced its inhabitants to adopt a lifeless communist version of Buddhism. The Panchen Lama, regarded as the second highest authority in Tibetan Buddhism, is incredibly politically and spiritually powerful. However, the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government are engaged in a political conflict that has complicated this function. At the age of 6, Gedhun Choekyi Nyima, whom the Dalai Lama acknowledges as the 11th Panchen Lama, was kidnapped by the Chinese government in 1995. Gyaltsen Norbu, who is more of a political spokesman for the Communist Party and lacks legitimacy among Tibetans, was nominated by the Chinese government to take his place. Tibetans regard Gyaltsen Norbu as a puppet of China, pushing communist doctrine and Sinicization. This strengthens opposition and draws attention to the Chinese government's inability to establish genuine legitimacy in Tibet. It is now widely known that China has started to portray Buddhism as an ancient Chinese religion in recent years and has allowed its citizens to practice it with some degree of freedom. There could be advantages to this action in the local and global arenas. In China, government-sponsored Buddhism is viewed as a means of fostering societal stability, especially in areas where social unrest is present, such as the Tibet Autonomous Region and other Tibetan communities. The government seeks to reduce conflicts and promote unity by highlighting the shared cultural history. China aims to expand its influence abroad by taking advantage of the Buddhist movement in neighboring areas. China wants to increase its soft power and broaden its geopolitical influence by becoming a major sponsor and influencer of influential Buddhist organizations. India, where Buddhism originated, has a distinct perspective on the religion. Buddhism is welcomed in India as a diplomatic and cultural preservation strategy. India utilizes Buddhism, on the one hand, to forge closer relations with its neighboring Buddhist countries in Southeast Asia. On the other hand, India considers it a vital responsibility to preserve Tibetan Buddhist traditions and provide a haven for those who are fleeing religious persecution. India thus acknowledges its capacity to promote both global ties and the welfare of its heterogeneous populace. The destiny of Tibetan Buddhism and China's hold on Tibet rests with the next Dalai Lama. China challenges the authority of the present Dalai Lama, who is nearing the end of his life, while Tibetan leaders oppose Chinese domination. The Dalai Lama must come back to China and acknowledge their authority immediately. If that fails, they hope to install their own Dalai Lama to maintain power over the Tibetan religious establishment and secure their hold on the area. But this raises the possibility of more upheaval and discontent because decades of hostility haven't made Tibetan resistance to Chinese rule any less fierce. China wants to control the story about the Dalai Lama and cast doubt on India's historical ties to Buddhism. Prime Minister Modi recently expressed gratitude for the Dalai Lama's birthday, highlighting India's long-standing tradition of treating him as a valued guest. This action resonates significantly because of the centuries-old Buddhist relationship between Tibet and India. The solid philosophical and cultural roots of Tibetan culture in India, particularly the belief in reincarnation and the careful selection of the Dalai Lama, further reinforce this historical connection. But when China invaded Tibet in 1949, the historical balance was upset. Citing Tibet's well-established institutions and close cultural ties to India, India promptly denounced the invasion and acknowledged Tibet's independence. In 1962, China launched an aggressive internal and external campaign to eradicate Buddhist customs and establish its supremacy in the region. The intricate, entwined history of Buddhism, India, and China was ultimately sealed by the Dalai Lama's 1959 flight to India and India's recognition of Tibet's constrained autonomy. Reputable Tibetan Buddhist scholar Geshe Lakdar contends that China uses grandiose events like World Buddhist Conferences as a smokescreen to dominate the Buddhist world. They aim to establish Gyaltsen Norbu, the Panchen Lama they chose as the preeminent Buddhist leader, to justify their rule over Tibet. This endeavor has failed. The entire world acknowledges Norbu as a puppet, mouthing propaganda from China. China is fixated on this pretense because it needs an excuse for its violent occupation of Tibet, which is characterized by torture, forced disappearances, and the eradication of Tibetan culture. The suffering of the Panchen Lama is a symbol of Tibet's resistance and China's persecution. The Panchen Lama's spiritual legacy and traditional position are in grave danger while China is in power. The Chinese government's hollow emblem of their failed attempt to rule Tibetan Buddhism is Norbu's submission to them. Beyond Tibet, China's contempt for human rights is widespread. Even though it is a mighty nation, it violates international law and treaties, suppressing dissent and mistreating minorities like Mongolians and Uyghurs. China's true aim is shown by its refusal to participate in international scrutiny and uphold basic human dignity. The Turkic Uyghurs have a long and rich history that dates back thousands of years. They have built numerous kingdoms and empires yet have struggled for years to stay independent. The Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was created by China in 1955 following multiple attempts at autonomy during the 20th century. Uyghur complaints over immigration, cultural erasure, and economic disenfranchisement, while initially peaceful, have become more intense in recent years. Since 2017, China has been accused of violating Uyghur human rights through mass incarceration, forced labor, and other means, leading to worldwide condemnation and fears of genocide. Independent data indicates that the Uyghur Muslim community in Xinjiang is still subjected to oppression and suffering despite China's assertions of normalcy. The original Mongolian language in foundational areas like language, politics, and history has been replaced by Mandarin Chinese as the language of instruction in Inner Mongolia, per the directive of China's Communist Party. This decision has triggered protests, and ethnic Mongolians who oppose it risk detention or being forced to resign. The CCP's policies counter the statutes that safeguard minority language instruction. The drive for Mandarin assimilation raises worries about cultural repression and coerced national unification because it is reminiscent of strategies employed against other ethnic groups, such as the Uyghurs and the Tibetans. A local scholar named Kai Meterge eloquently encapsulates the dire consequences: if our language is eradicated, we as a distinct people will also cease to exist. The CCP's actions raise serious concerns about human rights and cultural preservation in China by highlighting a larger pattern of repression against minority cultures and religions under the pretext of social stability and national unity. The world needs to continue being watchful. The Panchen Lama dispute is a microcosm of the more significant fight for cultural preservation and human rights. Tibet can only gain justice and self-determination through steadfast Tibetan resistance and global unity. China's manipulation of Tibetan Buddhism, especially about the Panchen Lama dispute, reveals a broader conflict encompassing violations of human rights and repression of cultural expression. China's desire to dominate Tibet's spiritual legacy is demonstrated by the kidnapping of Gedhun Choekyi Nyima and the imposition of Gyaltsen Norbu. This attempt is not limited to Tibet, it is also evident in the Uyghur and Mongolian regions. The power struggle between China and India has made the Dalai Lama a key figure and jeopardized their shared history. The criticism by Geshe Lhokpa exposed China's disingenuous leadership and use of a smokescreen to justify authority. To defend human rights, uphold cultural traditions, and guarantee justice for Tibet and other regions, we must never waver in our call for solidarity against China's repressive narrative.